Hello, hello again. Back already, I hope. Hope you had a quick snack. I got my tea here. Ooh, yeah, it's nice. All right. All right, well, now we can start. Ooh, now I'm going to be spitting everywhere. Sorry. Uh, now we can start our very first video lecture. Hooray. In this, I want to talk generally just about what ethics is. What are we going to be studying in this course? And so one thing I'd like to say right up front, just to avoid confusion perhaps later on, is that I'm going to be using words like ethics, morals to mean the same thing. Morality, ethics, same thing. I'm not Hegel. I'm not a fancy 19th century philosopher who thinks there's a major difference between ethics and morality. For the purpose of this class, they are synonyms. If you use them differently, that's fine. Be clear on that in your writing for this class. But for me, my perspective, I am not going to treat these as meaning anything different. So if I use ethics once and then say morality later, I'm not trying to be clever or subtle. I mean, for all intents and purposes, the exact same thing. So just so you're aware of that. Now, okay, on to the reading from James Rachels and Stuart Rachels. They begin their little chapter with a little quote, which I like, which comes from Socrates, and it's about, I got ahead of myself. Fun fact, Stuart Rachels is the son of James Rachels. And when James Rachels passed away a few years ago, Stuart took up the mantle, I guess, to write these books and new editions and make money. And we can debate whether the new editions are better than the old ones. As you can tell, as we go further, I've used material from different editions when I think some are better than others. Anyhow, fun fact, why not? In any case, the reading from the module for today begins with this quote from Socrates. We are discussing no small matter, but how we ought to live. I think this really gets to the heart of what ethics is. Yeah, I am spitting. I think this really gets to the heart of what ethics is about. On the whole, ethics is concerned with our whole life and the actions that we take that make up that life. Most of us, I assume, have asked ourselves, how should I live? And maybe by extension, unless you live on a desert island, you probably also have thought about how should we live? So it can be a very personal question about how ought I live, but it can also take on a much more complicated notion because we don't live in isolation. Heck, even I don't know who seriously lives as a hermit these days in our interconnected world. So yeah, it really does become how should we live? But that's the idea. This means ethics is part of our lives, is that by the very fact of living your life, which I hope you do, I hope you lead a life that means something and matters to you. I hope so. Then you are practicing ethics. We are literally doing ethics all the time, whether we realize it or not. I suppose if we're unconscious, then maybe we're not doing ethics. Actually, it's funny. Aristotle has a whole chapter in his ethics about whether we're doing ethics when we dream or not. Because, anyway, you get the idea. How we ought to live. That's why this is so important to us and so fundamental and not something abstract or optional. It's something we're living. And we might restate this in the form of a question, what ought I do? This is perhaps the most practical of questions because it's about what I should be doing. It's about action. That's practical. And indeed, for this class, I would say this is the practical question. What ought I to do? Doesn't get much more basic or practical than that. And we're responding to this question all the time. This suggests that ethics is all about our actions. That's why it's practical. Heck, ethics is strategic in that sense, because it's about planning and what am I doing and how does this fit together? And this is quite literally the case being about action. If you look at the ancient Greek, for instance, practical comes from the Greek word praxis, which is the Greek word for action. I mean, that's what we mean when we talk about practical. So that's the first point would like to make, is that ethics is about action. It's about what ought we be doing, how we ought to be living. Now these are great questions. I love them, and we'll be talking about them a lot. And now there's traditionally 3 different ways to approach these questions of ethics. So I'll talk about these 3 ways now. The first way to approach ethics is through meta-ethics. This is the most abstract approach to ethics, meta-ethics. It's a concern with what do our claims mean when we are doing ethics. So how are claims in ethics Well, what do they mean? It's also about how are our claims in ethics justified? Oh, now I got a sniffly nose, the T. So for example, if I say slavery is wrong, that seems to be an ethical claim. And in meta-ethics, we ask, what exactly do I mean by that? When I say slavery is wrong, am I just giving you my opinion about slavery? Or am I doing something more, something stronger than just talking about my opinions? You know, about opinions, everyone has one, right? They're like something else on the body. I'm keeping it clean, but you probably heard that joke. Okay, so again, if I say slavery is wrong, what do I mean by that? That's metaethics. Metaethics would also say, if I say slavery is wrong, how would you justify that claim? Is this claim simply true because when I think about slavery, it makes me feel sick and disgusted? Is that all that I'm saying when I say that slavery is wrong? I just justify by being like, ugh, it's gross, makes me feel sick. Or are there other actually good arguments about why slavery should not exist? That's all this is meta-ethics. Again, in meta-ethics, we're concerned with what do our claims in ethics mean and how do we go about justifying those claims? And we'll be doing this in the first 2 units of the course. We'll be thinking about how do we justify our moral claims. And along the way, I think we'll also see a bit about, well, what does it mean, at least in a very basic sense? Of course, metaethics is abstract and can get quite wild, and we won't go to the wild side. We'll try to keep it down to earth for our conversations. But it's important to understand, how do we justify these claims in ethics? And I think by the end of even this module, we'll have a sense of where we're going with that. Okay, so the first way is meta-ethics. The second way to approach ethics is normative ethics. The concern here is about actually stating and then defending basic moral principles. So I want to know, what are the basic moral principles and how do you justify them? Now you can see that if we haven't done meta-ethics, this might be a little confusing. How do you know, because meta-ethics, again, tells me what does it mean, how do I justify it? And then normative ethics actually then does it. It says, well, for example, some philosophers believe that morality at bottom just boils down to happiness. Happiness is something good, something that needs to be promoted. And so the basic moral rules or principles all boil down to promoting happiness in certain ways. And then the debates are, whose happiness? How do we weigh it, count it, whatever? What is happiness? Fascinating discussions. That's one group of philosophers we'll see. Another group of philosophers thinks, well, maybe it's not about morality, isn't about happiness, but the principles are based on absolute moral rules that we must follow at all times, like never lie, always preserve life, something like that. So again, these are just different ways of identifying the basic moral principles that ought to guide our conduct and our actions. And maybe a third approach would be about like human rights or something. So again, lots of different ways to do normative ethics. But again, all these examples of normative ethics, happiness, human rights, absolute rules, these are all normative ethics, just stating and then defending basic moral principles. And starting in Unit 3 of the course throughout till the end of the semester, we'll be looking at different normative approaches to ethics like this. Again, different people who are going to lay out what are the moral principles and why they think those are the right ones to defend. And I'm often asked at this point, well, Professor, why don't we just jump to the end? Which one's the right one? And we can end the course early, week 1. Awesome. Not much to do during a pandemic, so maybe we'll extend it a little. No, but spoiler alert, I like to say this up front. I'm not going to tell you who is right and who is wrong. That's not my job. You have the rest of your life to figure that out for yourself. And I hope you use that. Maybe we'll come back to that on the last module. All I'm here to do is help train you with your cognitive and affective capacities for deliberating with other people about ethics. And I'll leave it to you to decide how you're going to live your life and by what principles. So we're going to, again, lots of different views in normative ethics. We're going to see a ton of them. But it's up to you to decide which one you think is worth living by and defending. Like I said, maybe that's a question we'll come back very last module. Someone remind me. Sorry, anyway, that's dramatic, I know. Now, these first 2 areas of ethics, meta-ethics, normative ethics, are often combined into what we might call ethical theory. Ethical theory concerns, by putting these together, concerns discovering or laying out or defending the one, the best, the one and only, Arch Tectonic System for Living and Acting. Oh, I love it. That's the name of a band, Arch Tectonic System. Oh, I got to go write that down. That's a great band name. No, so ethical theory is about what is the best way to live and act. And this stuff is, of course, what philosophers are arguing about all the time. It's a fun debate, and we're going to see it throughout. Where you fall in that debate, like I said, you have the rest of your lives to figure out. All right, so I mentioned there were 3 approaches to ethics. I've talked about the first 2, meta-ethics, normative ethics, how they come together in something that's called ethical theory, the debate of philosophers. But what about this third way? Now, this third way, which I've done a lot of work in, which is why I kind of think it's special and important in its own right, is applied ethics. This concerns with how people should act in particular specific situations. And applied ethics is very popular at UB. There medical ethics, for instance, we have lots of courses on that. Medical ethics, that's about how doctors and other professionals in medicine ought to behave. That's applied. It's not about abstract, the best way of life. It's very specific. How should doctors act in certain situations? And it can get quite fun and interesting. There's a course on it. Take it. It's great. There's also research ethics. So you can look at medicine, but then you can focus specifically on research in medicine and what's the ethics of that. I teach a course on business ethics. So that's about how business professionals ought to behave. I've taught a course on leadership ethics about how political and other kinds of leaders ought to behave, and so on and so on. For any specific area of life or profession or whatever, that's applied ethics. How ought we act in these specific cases or in these specific areas of life? That's all applied ethics. And we'll be doing lots of these cases sprinkled throughout the semester, seeing about, specific social issues and, how do we justify and judge what should be done in those cases? So we will be doing all 3. Applied, again, will be like when we talk about specific issues like, do we owe the poor anything? And what about opioids? Should the opioid drug manufacturers be paying the victims compensation? So on. We'll talk about lots of this stuff. Now, applied ethics is pretty different from ethical theory. While ethical theory is that high-level abstract crazy debate between philosophers over the best way of life and living and acting, applied ethics is, maybe we'll say, down to earth. It's what's going on between regular people. Ethical theory, the debates of philosophers. Applied ethics, the debate of everyone else. Normal people, I guess, not philosophers. Philosophers aren't normal, as you probably figured out by now. You're smart. Applied ethics involves the debates between normal people about what we should be doing, again, in these specific areas, in these specific cases. So anything when it's politics, social issues, all sorts of the everyday issues that we face, that's applied ethics, and it can be done all different ways. So to review, there are 3 approaches to ethics. Meta-ethics. What do ethical claims mean? How do we justify ethical claims? That's meta-ethics. 2, normative ethics. What are the correct or right basic moral principles? Applied ethics. What should we be doing in this specific case or on this specific issue? And so again, that's 3, meta-ethics, normative ethics, applied ethics. The first 2, meta-ethics, normative ethics, make up ethical theory, the debate between philosophers over the best way to live. The third approach, applied ethics, about the everyday debates between normal people have about specific social and other issues that they are facing. My goal is to equip you for all of that. And then you can decide where you're going to take it. And that's always exciting to figure out where you guys take it. All right, well, that's enough for this part. So why don't you, again, grab another snack, and then I'll talk about how ethics is different from other areas of study. See you back here in a moment.